Well, hello, and thank you for joining us here today in downtown Edmonton. My name is Mike Ellis, and I am the UCP candidate in Calgary West. I'm joined here today by our UCP leader, Danielle Smith, as well as a number of candidates, Syed Ahmed, Dr. Terry Ivanka, Melissa Crane, Richard Wong, Miad El Zain, Miles Berry, Ali Haymore, Luke Savanto, and Slava Kravisenko. Hope I got that pronunciation correct, and I apologize if I didn't. We're also honored to be joined by our incredible advocate here in downtown Edmonton, Holly Ma, who's here to my left, past president of the Chinatown BIA. Today, we are here to talk about an important topic that is top of mind for many Albertans, from those right here in the downtown core to families in remote rural communities right across this province. Public safety and taking meaningful action to address social disorder. As the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, I have had the incredible opportunity to engage with Albertans from all walks of life. I've had the opportunity to listen to their concerns and share the strong and effective action that the UCP government has taken to tackle issues like organized crime, violent offenders, and supporting our law enforcement. And as I have traveled across the province, diverse Alberta communities have shared our stance when it comes to proposed policies from the left that enable criminals to terrorize our neighborhoods. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. We have seen that these soft on crime activists are quick to tell Albertans that they have to make a choice between compassion and addressing public safety. But folks, as I have told those I've engaged with as the public safety minister, from Edmonton's Chinatown to families down in Lethbridge, you do not have to choose one over the other. With our UCP's comprehensive public safety plan, we can do both. We can support our most vulnerable, we can support our most vulnerable communities, and we can also be tough on crime. For more on the UCP's plan for public safety, I'm now going to pass it on to our leader, Danielle Smith. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you all for being here today. I'm pleased to be joined by Mike Ellis, United Conservative Party candidate in Calgary West and former police officer. Almost every day, Albertans wake up to news that someone in their city or community has been attacked, or even worse. Just yesterday, Edmonton Police Chief Dale McPhee spoke about the horrific murder of a mother and her 11-year-old child in broad daylight. Chief McPhee expressed great frustration that the accused was well known to police, having a history dating back to 2009 that included multiple charges. Victims of crime are people's daughters, sons, parents, friends, and loved ones. And most often, the perpetrators of these crimes have been released on bail, some multiple times. In Edmonton in the last 2 years, 26 homicides were committed by criminals out on bail. And in Calgary, 23 of the 45 people charged with homicide in 2021, 2022, and 2023 so far were out on bail. 7 of those were bound by firearms prohibitions. The Liberal NDP soft on crime approach is costing lives, and Albertans and all Canadians deserve better. The United Conservative Party stands with our provincial partners, demanding the federal government end the system of catch and release, plaguing our communities, and reform our bail system. Voices in Alberta and Canada are growing stronger. Momentum for change is building. And I'm here to tell you, enough is enough. We will not wait on the federal government. We will take action to ensure Albertans feel safe again, and we will do whatever it takes to ensure they do. So today, I'm announcing the United Conservative Party's Safe Streets Action Plan, a comprehensive set of measures to restore safety to Alberta's cities, communities, and public transit. This plan will crack down on criminals with ankle bracelet monitoring of dangerous offenders out on bail and deploying sheriffs to monitor them. It'll mean 100 more patrol officers on the streets, brand new anti-fentanyl and anti-gun tracking teams, as well as more funding for internet child exploitation and gang suppression units. It will also make it easier for moms and dads to know the whereabouts of violent and sexual offenders and make investments in women's shelters and sexual assault counseling. The Safe Streets Action Plan will build on some of the United Conservative government's successes in keeping our streets and communities safe. In early February, we deployed the Alberta Sheriffs to Edmonton and Calgary to work alongside the Edmonton and Calgary Police Services to respond to crime and social disorder. In the first weeks of the pilot programs in Alberta's major cities, more than 4,500 outstanding arrest warrants were executed and close to 400 charges were laid. That's why a re-elected UCP government will extend the pilot projects to the end of the year and beyond that if necessary. Having more boots on the ground, patrolling our streets and communities is working, and we know that more boots on the ground are needed to continue protecting Albertans, which is why our United Conservatives will keep our commitment to add 100 more officers to help Edmonton and Calgary address chronic and worsening crime, particularly in downtowns and on transit. Their sole duty will be to patrol streets to ensure people are protected. And we know Alberta sheriffs have the skills and ability to further help in the protection of Alberta families and the safety of Alberta streets. And that's why, in addition to extending the pilot project, we'll expand the use of Alberta sheriffs in the 24/7 bail monitoring process for higher risk offenders released on bail. With the assistance of the Alberta sheriffs, we will ensure that criminals out on bail when they shouldn't be have more eyes on them. There is no free pass in Alberta. And to better monitor violent or sexual offenders out on bail, a re-elected UCP government will provide ankle bracelets. A re-elected United Conservative government would establish specialized sheriff-led anti-fentanyl and anti-gun trafficking units to target illegal supplies coming across the US border. Fentanyl is a scourge on our families and our communities. Alberta has a world-leading approach to addictions and mental health, and the United Conservative Party is here for any Albertan trapped in a deadly and destructive spiral so that they can heal and reach their full potential. But we need to be able to stop drugs before they reach Alberta's streets, and that's why these units are so crucial. Specialized teams have the ability to focus on a single priority instead of being pulled in multiple directions. And that's why United Conservatives are also committed to increased funding for specialized gang suppression units through the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams, or ALERT. Because gang violence isn't just a threat to individuals, it's a threat to our communities and to our children. As part of this increased funding, the UCP will look to create a provincial cybercrime unit, a provincial DNA lab, and help ALERT increase its monitoring of expensive catalytic converter thefts, which is increasingly used to fund gang activity. And will provide additional funding to ALERT's internet child exploitation team to ensure fewer children are victimized and offenders are brought to justice. Albertans should be able to walk downtown and walk in their communities without having to look over their shoulders. This is non-negotiable. And we have a right to take public transit without fear of crime and open air drug use. We will address gang violence, expand access to mental health and addiction treatments, and keep violent and sexual offenders off our streets. We are putting criminals on notice that Albertans will no longer tolerate being harassed and frightened or victimized. We will do whatever it takes for Albertans to feel safe on their streets, in their homes, in their communities, and riding public transit, period. And the United Conservative Party's Safe Streets Action Plan will do just that. Thank you, and I'd now like to invite Holly Ma of the Chinatown and Area Business Improvement Association to say a few words.
Thank you, Leader Smith, and good morning, everyone. Chinatown is suffering. We are experiencing unprecedented safety issues. You are witnessing the demise of a Chinatown that wants to survive. Safety is the most integral part of this survival. We have started to see the positive effects of the Healthy Streets Operations Center, but recognize that boots on the ground are spread too thin. Our seniors are afraid to come down to buy groceries. Our parents are reluctant to bring the children down for Chinese school. Our businesses keep their doors locked during operating hours. Our community has experienced the random murders of our shopkeepers. Entire businesses have been destroyed by arson. Broken windows and damages in the millions. Building after building leveled by arson. Through the city, we have incidents on our public transportation. Last week, the random murders of an innocent mother and child. This all must stop. I'm here because I love my community, and we want to see the suffering on our streets come to an end. We need help. We need action. Thank you. And thank you. And Mike Ellis will take the podium again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Holly. As many of you know, prior to being in politics, I spent over 10 years as a police officer on the streets of Calgary. A lot has changed in law enforcement since my time on the streets, and as we've seen, a segment of the population aim to villainize the men and women of our police services who put their lives on the line every day and every time they answer a call to service. At the same time, this villainization has been happening. We've seen crime, especially violent crime, increase. This villainization is unacceptable. Albertans know it, and the UCP know it, especially during a time of increased social disorder in our communities. That's why I'm concerned about the number of, quote, defund the police, unquote, candidates running in this election. And that's also why I'm so proud of this announcement today and a follow-up announcement by some of my fellow candidates. The UCP understands that the government has a role to play in keeping our families and communities safe. That role includes effective and meaningful policy changes, like the ones that we have taken over the past 4 years. We've made strong legislative changes, including the introduction of Clare's Law, further work to protect survivors of human trafficking and preventing convicted sexual and dangerous offenders from being able to legally change their names. The important role of government also includes actual supporting our law enforcement and not just talking about it. You know, I was humbled to take a significant action on this over the past 6 months with the creation of the new teams and increased funding for existing units. And the UCP is committed to continuing this work. We expanded the mandate and powers of the Alberta sheriffs for effective law enforcement across the province, and further redeployed sheriffs in, of course, downtown Calgary and Edmonton. It was our UCP government that also took tangible action with the creation of the gang suppression units and firearms investigative units and launching a fugitive apprehension team. United Conservatives will do whatever it takes for Albertans to feel safe in their homes, in their streets, and their communities. And what we're promising today will build off those earlier steps. It is no secret that fentanyl has devastated the lives of thousands of Albertans. Those on the left would look to completely decriminalize the incredibly dangerous drugs such as fentanyl. And let me be clear, this would only empower organized crime. It would empower the criminals, and it would hamper the efforts of our law enforcement community. Criminals are profiting off the addiction and, of course, the death that is caused by this drug. And it's time that we say, as a community, no more. A new anti-fentanyl team led by the Alberta Sheriffs will take the fight right to our U.S. border to stop these drugs from crossing into our province. And they'll be joined by an anti-gun trafficking team that will work to stop illegal guns from making their way into the hands of the criminals and the gang members. Because while the federal government targets legal gun owners, we know that the gun violence being perpetrated on Alberta streets come from illegal sales and trades of guns and people whose first thought, unfortunately, is violence. I'm going to give you a small, slightly anecdotal story. I had the opportunity to walk the streets of Vancouver a few times over the last several years. I recommend people not go and walk the streets of Eastside Vancouver. It is extremely dangerous. Those are not just my words. Those are the words that were coming from the law enforcement community in that particular area that I was speaking with. But I want to talk to you about a young fellow by the name of Colin. Colin was out with us. Colin's in recovery. Colin is a young gentleman who is spent a good portion of his life in jail. If you looked at Colin, you would probably be intimidated by Colin. He's, he's got the, he He has a serious history when it comes to being part of a gang, and he certainly has a serious a history of incarceration. But Colin and I got to know each other, and we talked. And I asked him how long he had spent in jail, and he had indicated that he had spent probably over, in and out of jail for probably well over 8 years. And of course, in Canada, that's actually a significant amount of time. Because of his addiction, I believe that I made an assumption that he was, doing petty thefts in order to, assist with his habit. Usually it was fentanyl or quite frankly, crystal meth or a combination thereof. And Colin very sheepishly put down his head and he's like, "No, sir, Minister, that's not the crimes I was committing." I said, "Oh, wow, okay. What crimes were you committing?" "I was committing armed robberies right across Canada, getting firearms, going to banks, other institutions, hopping on top of the tables and the desks, pulling out a gun and basically saying, 'Give me all the money.'" And he was doing that in order to feed his habit. Now, I can tell you, I asked Colin, I said, "Colin," I said, where did you lawfully purchase that firearm?" I said. He looked at me with very stunned amazement. He said, "Minister, what are you talking about?" He said, I didn't lawfully purchase this gun." He says, "We get it because it's smuggled across the border from the United States." And that's the point I'm trying to make. The evidence that comes, whether it be through anecdotal stories, or whether it becomes through our folks from the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams, will tell you that these illegal firearms, which are creating havoc in our communities, are not coming from lawful gun owners. They are coming from the United States, or they are coming from lawful gun owners who have been robbed. That's the fact. Now, I must give credit to Colin as well. Although he's lived a very tough life, his addiction, he's overcome his addiction. And as a result of overcoming his addiction, he is leading a very productive life. So recovery, ladies and gentlemen, for anybody listening, and you all know that I was Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, recovery is possible. And that's why we put all these supports in place. So folks, I just want to let everybody know that United Conservatives, we're putting criminals on notice. And our message to those who prey on our most vulnerable in our communities is quite simple. Enough is enough. Albertans are no longer going to tolerate being harassed or frightened or victimized. We're the only ones with a credible plan that puts families at the center of safety, because as citizens, you have rights too. You have a right to live in your community, free of violence and social disorder. You have a right to take transit to school or work without harassment. And your children have a right to play on the streets without fear. The UCP is committed to protecting those rights, and we look forward to being able to continue that important work. And with that, we will turn it over to questions.
All right, thanks everybody. They have quite a few questions today. And so everybody, please just line up the mic. If you have a question, please your name and your outlet. And we will be taking one question so we can get through as many as we can. Go ahead.
Hi there, Janet French from the CBC for the Premier. Question about evacuation payments. Some evacuees are telling us that this wildfire situation is very different than the Fort McMurray wildfire situation, that they're being displaced multiple times and would therefore not qualify for the evacuation payment under the current structure. How much wiggle room is there to reconsider changing the payment program so that more evacuees would qualify?
You know, we're going to have a telephone town hall tonight with anyone who's been evacuated so that we can get some feedback from them on what is working and where they might need more support. The policy that had been passed in 2020 was related to those who had been displaced for 7 days or longer. It initially was only for uninsured losses, so things like floods. We made the decision to have that exemption right away. That was one of the reasons why we had our emergency management committee meet, so that even those who might be able to get insurance would be covered. And the importance of that is, as I talked to insurance companies, I discovered that many of them have deductibles, and so we wanted to make sure that people were supported. Plus, Red Cross had 3 days that they were providing for hotels. I recognize that might be particularly challenging. I do believe Evansburg and and we still have returned home. So we'll get feedback on this, and depending on what I hear, I will certainly take that back to our cabinet for discussion. I think we all realize, though, that if somebody's been out displaced for 7 days or longer, it's pretty clear they're going to need additional support. So that was the thinking behind it. But we started with an initial policy, made an amendment, and if we need to make further amendments, well, I'll bring that back to my emergency cabinet.
Joëlle Bouchard from Radio-Canada. My question is about military help from the federal to help fight wildfires in Alberta. Do you know when that help will be coming? And in your opinion, is it coming fast enough?
I would say that the federal interagency support has been there from day one. My Forestry, Parks and Tourism Minister, Todd Loewen, said that May 1st is when we first made contact and requests of the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. That has been in operation. When I spoke with the Prime Minister, he said it's been in operation since 1982. And as we continue to have more of these events, it becomes faster and more integrated. It's part of the reason we already have teams arriving from Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia. Part of the reason we already have calls out for 1,100 more firefighters, including internationally. So I want people to understand that that mechanism of federal, provincial cooperation already exists, already been activated, and we're already getting a ton of help. The additional resources was whether we could ask the Canadian Armed Forces, who are stationed here, if there was internal firefighting capacity. We'd been given differing information on that. When I met with the head of PPCLI yesterday, when Brigadier General Graham introduced me to him, he said that they do have 300 individuals who are within that unit that are trained in firefighting. They were meeting at 9:30 this morning to talk about how they would be able to integrate them into the response. There is just so many little hot spots that need to be extinguished, and so I had asked our forestry minister to give us an update on how that's going to go tomorrow. But I can tell you, after I made the call with the Prime Minister, military was on site for our briefing yesterday, and they're already talking about integration as of 9:30 this morning. So that's pretty fast.
Arthur Green, Western Standard. My question is for the Premier. I was told that the Edmonton Council is putting out their safety plan today for safe streets as well. We talk about left wing, we talk about right wing. Can you just tell me how left wing safety policies differ from right wing safety policies?
I can only tell you from what I have observed in Vancouver East Side and all down the coast of California, is that I think the problem associated why those communities end up in the state that they are, with the tent cities and the increasing amount of drug addiction and the increasing amount of social disorder, is that there isn't a pathway and a support for additional mental health support. Is why we have taken a two-pronged approach. We'll have more to say about our mental health approach, but it's become known as the Alberta model. People are coming from around the world to see what it is that we're doing. It builds on some of what we've seen in Portugal, where you support harm reduction, but harm reduction as a pathway to get into treatment. It's why we, when Rachel Notley was Premier, she had a $40 per day charge on mental health beds. We immediately removed that service fee, that user fee, so that we had free access to publicly funded treatment beds. We increased our amount of treatment beds. We now have the capability to treat 29,000 people per year. And it's because we have that foundation of a pathway to recovery. We're building 10 recovery communities. The first one have already opened, one in Red Deer. It's because we have that pathway to recovery that we now have the ability to also augment that with the policing response. Anytime you can confront somebody on the street, there's sort of two different pathways. Some are really do have a mental health addiction or healthcare concern and crisis, and we have to have a pathway to help those folks. But there are others who are preying on them through organized crime and gangs, and there are others who are really bad dudes who are hurting people, and we have to be able to differentiate those two, have a pathway for both. That's what I think is missing in the sort of a more left-wing response. I don't think that they're tough enough on either. I don't think that they give enough access to treatment, and I don't think that they give enough enforcement on those who mean to harm us. And that's why we have such a different policy. And I think our policy is going to work. You can already see the results. The third aspect to this, which is really alarming to me, which I certainly do not want to see in Alberta, and we've taken a strong stance against it, is what has become known as safe supply. And I must tell you, I don't think there is such a thing as safe supply of heroin or fentanyl or crystal meth. We will not be providing government-funded drugs to people. We will be finding a pathway for them to be able to get off those harmful drugs. And you can already see the results in Vancouver. They took the safe supply approach about 2 months ago, and they are now getting, the last story I saw on this, 45 calls a day of people who are overdosing. That's up double in 2 months. So that's what I would say. There's sort of three big aspects about what's different between our approach and what we would see with a left-wing approach.
Sure. And Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. We're going to be seeing more frequent and intense natural disasters, whether it be wildfires or flooding. And I'm hoping you can tell me what your mid to long-term climate resilience plan is. Is it more emergency contingency funding? Is it flood mitigation projects? What's the mid to long-term plan?
Well, there's a couple of aspects. I'm sure you saw our emissions reduction and energy development plan that was released a couple of weeks before the election call. And that charts a pathway for us to align with the federal aspiration of being carbon neutral by 2050. So we are going to work with federal counterparts in order to reduce emissions in a way that's logical, practical, affordable, and makes sense for our province, which means having transition to reduce emissions, but continue to rely on bitumen beyond combustion, hydrogen, having a geothermal, lithium development, having export of LNG, as well as ultimately introducing small modular reactors. So we know that there has to be some work on that side. But I think what more practically what people need to see is that as long as we're going to have severe weather events, and we do, we've had numerous severe weather events. My experience when I was last in politics was the Southern Alberta floods. Prior to that had been the Slave Lake fire. We saw the Fort McMurray fires not too long ago, and now we're experiencing this again. And just to put this into context, because I toured the Emergency Management Agency yesterday, and talked to one of the experts who are monitoring the forest fires is, well, how does this compare to a typical year? In a typical year, he said, maybe you'd have 30,000 hectares burned. And we've already had 390,000 hectares burned. So it's already 10 times the typical fire year, and we're really just getting started. So it's an extraordinary, unprecedented event, which is I think what we have to be prepared for in future. So we have a number of programs for doing fire smarting of communities. I know that back in 2005, George Greneville did a flood report where he identified communities that were at risk. And I think that what we're going to have to see is more coordination. And I hope that comes out of this coordinated province-wide report or response that we have right now of helping to assist our municipalities and ensuring that they have all of the measures that they can take in place in order to have avoidance so that we don't have these kinds of instances. But I think we will always have to be a lot more nimble, as we've had in this case, to making sure that the province steps in with their resources as soon as a fire gets out of hand. For small municipalities, it can exhaust their resources very quickly. And so I'm just so pleased to see the level of coordination that we have. But I think we have to go back and realize that we may not be able to stop these kind of severe weather events, and we have to do a lot more to protect communities so everybody feels safe.
Hi, Audrey Neveu, Radio-Canada. The Canadian Press reported this morning that some former firefighters report that your government's eliminating of the Rappel firefighting program is making it harder to fight fires right now because they can't be stopped early on. So how much of this current emergency give you pause to reconsider restarting this program?
Look, we're going to have to make sure, as I said, having a 10 times worse fire event from what we've ever seen historically is obviously going to have to make us analyze what it is that we need to have for baseline support, especially since we have the Interagency Forest Fire Center that allows for us to provide additional support to other provinces and internationally. So I've already raised that with the civil service, that let's make sure that we do an assessment so that we know what our base level should be, make sure that we can handle a typical fire year. And and do that assessment. I know that because this was extraordinary, it's pretty difficult to be able to manage this without the interagency help. It just I don't know that would be a reasonable expectation that we'd be able to manage this all on our own, which is why I'm grateful that we've been working so hard for so many years on developing that interagency support. So to give you some idea, we have over 700 firefighters, and we've made a request to have 1,100 come in from other parts of the country, and we're continuing to make requests. We've identified 300 additional firefighters that are trained up through the Canadian military that are, as I said, are being talked to now to see if we can recruit them in. And yesterday we did a call as well to ask if individuals who had firefighting experience in the private sector and would be willing to be embedded with our teams, just to email us so that we would be able to see if we could also integrate them. So at this moment, it's all hands on deck, and we'll have to do the assessment in future years about how we make sure that we have everything that we need to manage a typical fire year.
Hello, Danielle. It's Duncan Kinney from the Progress Report. Oh, you all right? Haven't had a chance to chat with you since your radio show days, so good to catch up.
Hi, Duncan.
Yeah, so this could be a Mike Ellis answer, could be your answer, but I've got a Freedom of Information request that shows that just as visits to supervised consumption sites were dropping like a stone due to COVID, that calls for service to EMS for drug poisonings were spiking. UCP government didn't release this information. I had to get it through a FOIP. And then the UCP government then shut down supervised consumption sites anyway, knowing this information of what was happening to the EMS system. Do you think your chief of staff, perhaps Mike Ellis, do you think you owe paramedics an apology for doing what you did to the supervised consumption sites and knowing what it would do to the EMS system, as well as to the workload of paramedics?
I already hear Mike Ellis saying no behind me, so I know he wants to jump in and answer your question, so I'll let him do that, Duncan.
Duncan, we have the same amount of supervised consumption sites as when we took government in 2019. We're looking at opening up more supervised consumption sites in the Edmonton area, and that work is continuing to be ongoing. So, look, I mean, as I've said before, you know, this fentanyl overdose is a very, very complex problem. There is no one single silver bullet solution to this problem. You know, there's some people that want to believe that the only answer is supervised consumption sites. And as I've said before, and I'm pretty sure you have been in the room, is that it is part of the continuum of care. It is just not the answer to a very, very complex problem.
Sorry, just ask the question again about paramedics.
Do you feel you owe anything to the paramedics for what you did to the workload, for increasing what you did to the EMS system and how you increased it?
Okay, well, I would say this, that the issue of this fentanyl crisis is worse than I've ever seen. We've got stats going all the way back to prior when fentanyl entered the picture, and the level of overdoses have not returned to what they were before. And that's why I think fentanyl, that's why I say I don't think there's such thing as a safe supply. It's very, very serious. When it comes to paramedics, I feel very proud of what we have done in the last 4 months to improve support for our paramedics. We've ended the system where they were waiting 15 to 20 ambulances deep at all of our major acute care facilities. We have a drop and go system. We have got nurses on site to receive patients. And at any given time, we have 10 to 15 trained ambulance units ready to respond in Calgary and Edmonton. We have effectively ended the EMS code reds, EMS red alerts. We almost always have ambulances available, and these have been the remarkable changes that have happened since Dr. John Cowell became the official administrator. I would encourage you, Duncan, to go and ask some paramedics about what the current state of the EMS system is, because it is one of the biggest success stories and one of the biggest reasons why I feel so proud that we made a different approach on Alberta Health Services and put Dr. John Cowell in there.
Okay, let's go to Lisa, and then I have to hit the phone lines.
Thank you. Hi, it's Lisa Johnson from the Edmonton Journal. I have some questions just about the specifics of this announcement.
Yeah.
The press release noting that you plan to make it easier for moms and dads to know the whereabouts of violent and sexual offenders. I'm wondering if that relates to the bracelet monitoring program or what specifically that is. And I'm also wondering if you can clarify what this other clause means, make investments in women's shelters and sexual assault counseling, because we saw obviously with the budget, the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Centers Services called your budget a snub. It was $10 million lower than their request. They'd requested a $14 million increase to deal with the demand, and I think 4.2 million is what the budget saw increased to them. And as you know, that kind of preventative service
Mhm.
obviously prevents homelessness, addiction, some of the things we're talking about today. So I'm wondering if you have, that means the UCP has plans to increase that budget line more.
Correct. So the $4.2 million increase, we did end up giving that to other services. The particular agency that you were talking about, we had told them that we stood by on the ready to be able to write the check to them, but they declined it. And so we did find other ways to be able to support the sexual assault center community, and we'll continue to find ways to work with those different communities in order to support that. The ankle bracelet monitoring is going to be very important. I think the main difference that we're going to see is that if the federal government does not address the issue of the catch and release, we know we have to step in. That's why we will be using the ankle bracelets in order to be able to monitor. And I think you've seen as well that when dangerous individuals are released into the community, the police often send an alert out to the community. So rather than just sending out an alert, we'll have those two things together. I'll see if Mike has anything he wants to add.
Yeah, excellent answer, Premier. The only thing I would just add to that is that when we're talking about the mothers and fathers and people that, you know, the policy would be similar to Clare's law, right? Except for as it pertains to serious violent offenders. Again, no different was what the Premier had noted. The police will typically put out a warning if somebody is certainly going to be a risk to the community. So that's where that policy would come in.
All right, operator, let's go to the first caller, please.
Dave Kaiser, Global News. Good morning. Sorry about that. I was just trying to unmute there. My question for the UCP leader, Ms. Smith. I've seen numerous recordings now from Take Back Alberta gatherings making claims that they put you in that premier's chair and they have people in your office to ensure decisions which they approve of are made. So the question's simple. Does Take Back Alberta have control of you or the UCP? Do you consult them on decisions? And if not, why is this group claiming otherwise?
Well, look, I mean, we are a one member, one vote party. We have 120,000 members. We have a variety of different individuals who have a variety of interests and get involved with us for a variety of reasons. But we don't have specific caucuses or dedicated positions in our party for anyone, unlike the NDP. I mean, the NDP has dedicated positions on the provincial council for every union, including the Alberta Federation of Labor. They have dedicated delegate positions. They have a dedicated vote for their provincial leader when they have leadership contests. And the membership in the NDP means that the Alberta NDP is the provincial wing of the federal NDP. And so I guess I would say that when you look at the two-party structures, one member, one vote in our case, versus the embedded structure of the federal NDP and the unions in the NDP, I would think that Ms. Notley has more to answer for on that.
Next caller, please.
Jason Herring, Calgary Herald. Hi, for the Premier. Shortly after you were elected UCP leader, the UCP board disqualified Livingstone, the Cloud candidate Nadine Wellwood, who had made some social media posts comparing public health measures to oppressive Nazi Germany policies, and we've now heard comments that you made in 2021, where you compare Albertans who took COVID-19 vaccine supporters of Adolf Hitler. So I'm wondering, is the standard set with your party's handling of Nadine Wellwood one which applies to yourself, and if not, why?
Look, COVID was a really difficult and frustrating time for everyone, including me. And I don't think that there is a single one of us that wasn't deeply impacted in some way. Sometimes I let my frustrations get to me during that time. I clearly shouldn't have. But when I got elected, I vowed to put those dark days behind all of us. It's part of the reason why a few weeks ago, when I went to a Red Deer prayer breakfast, one of the things they asked when they were saying that what what do you want us to pray for? I said, you know what, let's just pray for every Albertan that each of us can get over the trauma of the last 3 years in our own way. Every single Albertan was hurt over that period of time. And it's why I vowed when I got elected that we were going to put it in the past, that we were going to look forward, that we were going to make sure that this was a place where everybody from every walk of life felt valued and respected and optimistic about the future. And that is what I'm going to continue to do.
All right, operator, let's go to our last caller.
Narem Issa, CTV. Hi there. This is just in regards to the evacuated sports. This for Fox Lake. They were evacuated by the First Nation and not the province. Are they eligible for support, and do they go about it in the same way?
Yes, they are eligible for supports. We have always, whenever we've had one of these payment programs, made sure that First Nations communities were included in it. And I did indicate to the Prime Minister that that was the case as well. There is a little bit of a complication in First Nations communities and our Métis settlements in that I've been told by our Indigenous Affairs Minister, Rick Wilson, that there are some individuals who don't have bank accounts. And so the way in which we normally would do these kinds of transfers is a very simple sign-up system, and then we would do an e-transfer. In these cases, I've asked the department to work directly with First Nations leaders to make sure that we have the ability to provide charged cards. We've done that in the past where we've got chargeable cards so that people have the ability to get access to the dollars if they don't have a bank account. So it might take a little bit more work in Fox Lake to do that. Certainly our East Prairie Métis settlement is another one where we know that we may have to do that also. It's why we've got a two-pronged approach. One will be through signing up online, getting the bank account information, and getting the deposits directly. And the other will be for those who need it. We've got the registry offices through Alberta Social Services to do that. The number to call for anything related to wildfire is nice and simple. We're going to keep it the same way, 310-4455. And anyone who needs assistance with evacuation payments can call that number and be able to get some support. Minister Ellis, our public safety minister, made that line available as of 8 o'clock last night, 24 hours. And so we're going to continue to provide that support across the board. As I mentioned, we're also going to have a town hall this evening and continue with town halls for evacuees so that all of this information becomes available to everybody and that they don't have to work unreasonably hard to try to find the information. We want to make it as easy as possible for people.
Thanks, everybody.
Is that it?